History tells us Lincoln saved the Union because he was a saint. That is just false. He saved it because he was a ruthless system designer. He understood you don't control a nation by killing your rivals.
No.
You control it by trapping them in a system where their ambition fuels your engine.
That is the critical distinction we need to make right at the start. The popular image of Lincoln is, this gentle, folksy guy who just wanted everyone to get along.
The rail splitter.
The rail splitter, but when you really look at the mechanics, especially through the lens of Doris Kearns Goodwin's team of rivals, you see something very different. You see a high-status operator.
It's a total reframing of the man. So the team of rivals wasn't some friendship circle. It was a human containment system.
It absolutely was. And that system is what we're here to decode today.
Welcome to Nonfiction Insights. Today we're stripping away the mythology to look at the pure mechanics of power. We are doing a deep dive into the Lincoln algorithm, specifically his use of what you could call cognitive weaponization and strategic containment. Our main data set is Goodwin's book, but we're looking at it through the lens of political engineering.
And the mission here is to deconstruct how Lincoln built a machine out of people who, frankly, despised him, and then how he used that machine to win the Civil War, because the lesson isn't about being nice.
No.
It's about architecture.
So let's start with what you might call the software update. The moment this system really comes online. It's May 1860, the Republican Convention in Chicago.
The scene of the crime, in a way.
If you look at the betting markets of 1860, Lincoln wasn't even an underdog. He was barely on the ticket.
Yeah.
The titan of the party was William Seward.
Oh, Seward was a celebrity. He was the governor of New York, a sitting senator, brilliant, sophisticated. He had the money. He had the organization.
He was the front runner.
By a mile.
Yeah.
And then you had Salmon P. Chase, the intellectual radical from Ohio, and Edward Bates, the conservative elder statesman. These men were the hardware of the party. They were the heavyweights.
And then there's Lincoln, a prairie lawyer with one term in Congress from, a decade earlier. His suits famously didn't fit. Contemporaries literally wrote about his wrists hanging out of his sleeves.
Right, and his hair looked like he'd been electrocuted. The rivals, they looked at Lincoln's hardware, his appearance, his resume, all of it, and they just assumed he was a clown.
A non-entity.
A total non-entity. But Lincoln looked at them and he saw their software. He saw their egos, their ambitions, and he knew exactly how to program them.
But the story of the wigwam, which was the convention hall, is the perfect example of this programming. This wasn't luck. This was pure structural engineering.
It was brute force logistics. Lincoln's campaign manager, a guy named David Davis, just a massive, sweating, ruthless operator, he realized that in a crowded convention, momentum is just volume. It's acoustic.
It's who can yell the loudest.
It's who can yell the loudest. So while Seward was back at his hotel, sipping champagne and assuming he had it in the bag, Davis was engaging in some, let's call it creative rule breaking.
He was counterfeiting tickets.
Literally.
Yeah.
Davis had his team print thousands of counterfeit tickets to the convention floor. He gave them out to what he called his leather-lunged men.
Great name.
Guys with voices like foghorns. He told them to pack the hall early, and when Lincoln's name was nominated, to scream until the roof cracked.
So Seward's delegates, they show up, maybe a little late, maybe a little hungover.
And they can't even get in the building. Every seat is taken by a Lincoln screamer. The psychological effect was just devastating.
I bet.
When Seward's name was nominated, there was polite applause. When Lincoln's name was nominated, the roar was so loud it reportedly terrified the New York delegation. It created this synthetic reality that Lincoln was the inevitable choice.
It rattled Seward. And in that moment of confusion, Lincoln snatches the nomination. He controlled the environment to control the outcome.
But look, winning the nomination is just the entry ticket. The real system design begins after he wins the presidency. The South secedes. The world is falling apart. And Lincoln has to build a cabinet. Now, conventional wisdom and just basic human nature says you hire your friends. You hire loyalists.
Right. You don't hire the guy who just spent 6 months calling you a third-rate country bumpkin.
But Lincoln does exactly that. He hires the very men he just beat. He makes Seward Secretary of State.
Unbelievable.
He makes Chase Secretary of the Treasury. He makes Bates Attorney General.
This is the core of that containment strategy. But we need to be really clear about the why. This wasn't magnanimity. This wasn't Lincoln saying, oh, let's all be friends now.
No. It was cold calculation.
Yeah.
It comes down to what's called the inside-the-tent logic. Lincoln knew these men were the centers of gravity for the different factions of his party.
Seward had the moderates.
Seward anchored the moderates and the old Whigs. Chase anchored the radicals. If Lincoln left them out of his cabinet, they would go back to the Senate or their home states.
And they become critics.
They would become the leaders of the opposition. Every single time Lincoln made a mistake, Seward would be there saying, "I told you so." By bringing them inside, Lincoln trapped them. He forced them to own the administration's failure.
He tethered their reputations to his own survival.
Precisely. If the ship sinks, they all drown. There's a crude old axiom about this. It is much better to have your enemies inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. Lincoln operationalized that axiom.
So he builds this machine of rivals. But managing them must have been a nightmare. I mean, these aren't just rivals. These are massive egos who think the president is totally incompetent. Let's look at William Seward, his Secretary of State.
Seward is fascinating because he starts out thinking he's going to run the entire show. He actually believed Lincoln was just a figurehead.
A well-meaning idiot.
A well-meaning idiot who needed a premier to actually run the country for him.
And we have the receipt for this. The April 1st memo.
This document is just incredible. It's April 1st, 1861. The administration is barely a month old. Seward sends Lincoln a memo called "Some Thoughts for the President's Consideration."
Which sounds polite.
It sounds polite, but it was essentially a coup attempt on paper.
What was that?
Seward writes that the government has no policy, no direction. Then he lists all these wild ideas like declaring war on Spain and France just to distract the South.
Wow.
But the kicker is at the end. He says, essentially, someone has to run this government. If you won't do it, I will.
He offered to be the dictator while Lincoln just shook hands and kissed babies.
Now, you have to pause and think about the response. A weaker man would fire Seward for insubordination. A tyrant would expose him publicly, humiliate him. Lincoln does neither.
This is the private checkmate.
That's it. Lincoln replied in a private letter. He went through Seward's points one by one, dismantled them with cool logic, and then, on the premier's suggestion, he wrote one sentence that changed everything. He said, "If this must be done, I must do it."
I must do it.
He didn't yell. He just asserted absolute authority. And, crucially, he never showed that memo to anyone else. He kept Seward's humiliation private.
That's dominance without humiliation.
And that is the key to creating an asset. If he humiliates Seward publicly, he creates a martyr and a lifelong enemy. By keeping it private, he creates a debt. Seward realized in that single moment that he had met his master.
And he completely changed his tune after that.
Completely. He wrote to his wife shortly after, "The president is the best of us." From that point on, Seward became Lincoln's most loyal, most effective asset.
He flipped him. He turned a liability into his primary asset just by controlling the flow of information. But that approach didn't work on everyone. I mean, Seward had a heart. Salmon P. Chase had a complex.
Chase is a different animal. Seward had an ego, but Chase believed he was God's gift to American politics. He was handsome, educated, radical, and he thought Lincoln was a cowardly, ill-equipped accident of history.
He was constantly bad-mouthing Lincoln in private diaries and letters, calling him weak, unfit.
And Lincoln knew it. Of course he knew it. Lincoln had spies everywhere. He knew exactly what Chase was saying behind his back.
So why keep him? This is the question that always comes up. Why keep a man who is actively plotting to take your job in the next election?
Because Lincoln needed a machine to fund the war, and Chase was a brilliant financier. This is cognitive weaponization. Lincoln took Chase's massive ambition and he harnessed it. He aimed it directly at the Treasury Department.
He gave him the hardest, most exhausting job in the government.
He trapped him in the work. It's the pumpkin trap. If Chase succeeds in funding the war, the Union is saved, and Lincoln gets the credit as president. If Chase fails, Chase gets the blame.
It's a win-win for Lincoln and a bind for Chase.
And he just tolerated the disrespect because it was fuel. There's that great story where someone comes to Lincoln and says, "You have to fire Chase, he's a traitor," and Lincoln uses the chinfly metaphor.
Right.
He says, if you have a horse that's plowing a field and a massive fly bites him, the horse kicks and moves faster. Chase's ambition was the chinfly. It made him work harder for the administration. Lincoln didn't care if Chase liked him.
He just cared if he was pulling the plow.
Exactly.
But there's a limit. And this is where the system designer reveals the kick upstairs. Walk us through the end game with Chase.
So it's 1864. The election is coming up. Chase has been threatening to resign every few months as a power play. Usually Lincoln refuses the resignation, to soothe Chase's ego.
Right.
But in June 1864, Chase threatens to resign one time too many. He thinks he's indispensable.
He overplayed his hand.
Crassically. Lincoln accepts the resignation on the spot. He just writes a note saying, essentially, "We have reached a point of mutual embarrassment." Chase is stunned. He's out.
But Lincoln doesn't just leave them out in the cold to become a critic.
No, that would be dangerous. Chase on the outside is a threat. So when the Chief Justice spot on the Supreme Court opens up, Lincoln appoints Chase.
The ultimate neutralization.
It is the masterpiece of his administration. He gives Chase the highest prestige possible, which satisfies that massive ego, but he removes him completely from political power. A Supreme Court justice can't run for president.
He can't undermine the executive branch.
Not on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Lincoln put him on a pedestal where he could do no harm.
It's brutal and elegant at the same time. It really challenges this idea that Lincoln was just empathetic. It sort of suggests his empathy was actually a form of military reconnaissance.
I think that's the most accurate way to look at it. Lincoln didn't feel your pain just to feel it. He felt it to predict your next move. He could simulate the minds of his enemies and his allies.
Which brings us to the biggest move of the war, the Emancipation Proclamation. Because this is so often framed purely as a moral crusade, but when you look at the timeline in Team of Rivals, it's a study in leverage.
It is a calculus of power. You have to remember the constraint Lincoln was operating under, the border states, Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, these were slave states that stood in the Union. If Lincoln moved against slavery too early, those states would secede, the balance of power would shift, and the war would be lost.
There's that famous quote, "I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky."
Exactly. It wasn't moral hesitation, it was operational reality. You had generals like Fremont and Hunter who tried to liberate slaves early in the war by military decree, and Lincoln publicly revoked their orders. He humiliated them.
And the abolitionists went crazy. They called him pro-slavery.
But Lincoln ignored them. He was waiting for the window of authority. He needed a military victory to frame emancipation as a weapon of war, not a desperate cry for help.
Because if he issues it when the North is losing,
it looks like a surrender, like he's trying to incite a slave rebellion because he can't win on the battlefield.
So he waits. He puts the draft in a drawer and just waits for Antietam.
Antietam happens. It's not a great victory, but it's enough. Lee is pushed back. The moment the Telegraph brings that news, Lincoln opens the drawer. He issues the preliminary proclamation. He used military leverage to buy the political capital for a moral revolution.
The discipline to wait is just so impressive. Most leaders would succumb to the pressure to do something. Lincoln waited until the system was perfectly aligned.
And while he waited, he had to absorb the hatred of his own base. That takes a steel spine.
Speaking of steel spines, let's talk about the enforcer of this system, Edwin Stanton, his Secretary of War.
Stanton is the Mars of the cabinet, a deeply intense, abrasive, workaholic man. He initially despised Lincoln, famously calling him the original gorilla.
Again with the insults. And Lincoln hires him anyway.
Because Lincoln needed a hammer, but more specifically, he needed a lightning rod.
How so?
Being president in a civil war means everyone wants something from you. Corrupt contractors want money, incompetent officers want promotions, mothers want their sons out of the army.
Right.
If Lincoln says no to everyone himself, he burns all his political capital. He becomes the bad guy.
So he uses Stanton to take the heat.
He sends them all to Stanton. Stanton screams at them, denies the request, and throws them out of his office. Then Lincoln can just shrug and say, "I'd love to help you, but Mars over there, he runs the War Department, and I can't overrule him."
The classic good cop, bad cop routine.
It was a safety valve. There's a story where Stanton writes this furious letter to a general who messed up. He shows it to Lincoln. Lincoln says, "Capital, that's a great letter." Stanton goes to send it, and Lincoln says, "Oh, no, you don't send it. Throw it in the wastebasket."
What?
You vented your anger, now we move on. He used Stanton to process the rage of the administration so that he could remain the calm center.
That emotional regulation is key. But I do want to pivot to the hard power aspect. Because for all this talk of management, there were moments where Lincoln simply broke the rules.
Oh, we have to address the dictator accusations. They weren't entirely wrong. Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. He arrested Maryland legislators to prevent them from voting for secession.
He threw politicians in jail without a trial.
He did. His logic was amputating a limb to save a life. He argued that the Constitution isn't a suicide pact. If following one rule like habeas corpus leads to the destruction of the entire government, then the rule must be suspended to save the structure.
It prioritizes the structure of the Union over the rules of the Constitution.
Which is a dangerous precedent, but from a system designer's perspective, it's the only logical move. You can't have the rule of law if there's no state left to enforce it.
This brings us to the final, and I think most brilliant example of this design philosophy, the blind memorandum of August 1864. This is a story that still gives me chills.
It is the ultimate example of system design. It's August 1864. The war is a stalemate. The casualties are horrific. Everyone, including Lincoln, believes he is going to lose the election to George McClellan.
And McClellan is running on a peace platform. If he wins, he might just negotiate a peace that leaves slavery intact.
Correct. So Lincoln writes a memo. In it, he pledges that if he loses, he will spend the time between the election and the inauguration cooperating with the president-elect to save the Union before the new administration takes over.
Because he knows McClellan won't save it afterwards.
Exactly. It's a pledge of duty. But here's the trick.
The design.
He folds the paper so the text is hidden. He glues it shut. He brings it to a cabinet meeting. And he asks every single member of his cabinet to sign the back of the envelope.
Sight unseen.
Sight unseen, they all sign it.
Why do that? Why not just let them read it?
Because he was locking them in. He knew that if he lost the election, his cabinet members would immediately start looking out for themselves. They might cut deals with McClellan, they might check out. By making them sign a blind pledge, he was psychologically binding them to a course of action they hadn't even seen yet.
He was using their own signatures against their future political maneuvering.
It's almost mafia-level brilliance. You sign the paper, you're in. It ensured a unified transition of power in the most dangerous moment of the Republic. And he did it without a single argument. He just designed a mechanism, the sealed envelope, that forced compliance.
So when we look at the whole picture, the convention hacking, containing Chase, taming Seward, the timing of Emancipation, Stanton as the lightning rod, what is the real takeaway?
The takeaway is that Lincoln wasn't a rail splitter. That was just the marketing. He was a high-status operator who treated human beings as components in a machine designed to save democracy. He didn't rely on the better angels of our nature to get things done. He built a system where even the devils had to work for the common good.
He weaponized empathy. He understood that you don't need your team to like you. You need a system where their self-interest aligns perfectly with your mission.
That is the core lesson. The lesson isn't to be nice like Lincoln. The lesson is to build an architecture where your enemies have no choice but to push your agenda forward.
A system where the chin flies make the horse plow the field.
That's the Lincoln algorithm.
Well, that completely changes how I view the memorial. It's not just a statue of a sad man in a chair. It's a monument to the ultimate political architect.
The architect of democracy.
If you want to understand the architecture of power, subscribe to Nonfiction Insights. We'll see you in the next deep dive.